We're here today as part of the Case Western Reserve University Entrepreneurship Alumni Series. We're here today with John Knific, who is an '09 alum and is the co-founder, president, and CEO of Wisr Incorporated. And we're also here with Case Western Reserve University student Bob Veale, who will graduate in 2022 and is pursuing his BS in finance. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to them. If you have any questions throughout, please post in the Q&A portion, and we'll get those answered throughout. So thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you, Bob.
Sweet, thank you. Hello, everyone. Today, I am lucky enough to introduce and moderate the conversation with our guest speaker, John Knific. John got his undergraduate degree at Case Western, and during his time there is when he first became an entrepreneur. He started Decision Desk in his dorm of his senior year and worked with the company as the CEO and founder. After a little over 8 years, he moved on to his next startup, which he continues to do today at Wisr. John is passionate about education technology and the role startups have in helping higher education. It is my pleasure to formally introduce John Knific.
Hey, Bob, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Can you hear me okay? I'm playing with this new podcasting mic. What a perfect occasion for that, right?
Oh, that's awesome. So John, can you give us a little background about yourself? And did you always know you wanted to own your own business and be an entrepreneur?
Definitely not. Oh, maybe in retrospect, there were some leading indicators. But background, how far back do you want me to go?
You tell me.
Okay.
Like high school, college, maybe starting college.
Sure. So, so I'm an '09 Case grad. I went to Case Western originally, pre-med. So I'll start there. So I have always had my foot in sort of two worlds. I've always really liked math and science. That would maybe go back to high school. But my parents are both professional musicians and music professors. And so I took piano very seriously. I'm an avid jazz pianist, studied that my whole life. And so Case was a really wonderful opportunity for me because I was accepted to the pre-professional scholars program for medicine. So it kind of gave me almost what felt like at the time a lottery ticket to get into med school. But, it's a really great music program. They have dually with the Cleveland Institute of Music. So that's ultimately why I picked to go to Case, because it kind of let me keep a foot in both of those worlds, where some of the other places I was admitted, I have to make kind of that choice early on. Ironically, I got to my junior year. I'd been, stuffing credit hours to kind of keep on top of both of the majors. And I decided to study abroad for 6 months and just do music. And while doing that, I decided I didn't want to be a musician professionally, so that was good. But I also decided that I wasn't sure I wanted to be a doctor. And I had always had sort of side hustles. I built websites for friends. I had a couple little businesses in high school. And so I put together what was kind of an executive summary / business plan, not having built a business plan before. So if you read it, I would have failed out of any class you'd have to take at Weatherhead. But put together a little business plan for basically like, this is going to sound ridiculous, but a musician's social network that was all video based. But if you transport back in time, this is when YouTube was just getting going. Facebook was just getting going. So this whole sort of social media, literally watching videos in your browser, like that was pretty cool stuff at the time. And not to, barrel through the rest of the interview, but essentially that was the setup for what eventually became Decision Desk with my two co-founders who were fellow Case grads. And since then I've spent 10 years in education technology. And that actually is what really led me to stay in Cleveland. I'm not a native Clevelander, but I started my business here, and now I have a wife and two awesome little boys who you might hear when they go take their naps in about 20 minutes because their rooms are right there, just as a solid heads up.
That's awesome. So how did you see a need for Decision Desk, and like who did you consult with while going about creating this new company?
It's a good question. I would say when we started, we were the quintessential kind of co-founders who were trying to build something we thought was cool without understanding what a market need was. Bear in mind, I think we were 20, maybe 19, 20. I'm 33 now. But the turning point was when we actually did venture out into the real world, sort of in search of opportunity and problems. And the entrepreneur ecosystem in Cleveland was really just emerging then. It's funny, when we went to some of the first pitch competitions, we were some of the only people pitching software. Now everyone is pitching software, right? Like software as a service, especially B2B software as a service. And so I had some really great people early on around Case who kind of found me. So Bob Sopko was around at that time, helped point me in the right direction. I wasn't at Weatherhead, and really all entrepreneurship happened through Weatherhead, but I was fortunate enough to meet a gentleman named Charlie Stack, who is one of the sort of godfathers of the Cleveland tech entrepreneurship scene. And he took me under his wing, and we won a few local pitch competitions for kind of this networking idea. And so to answer your question about did we see a need, do we have time for like a 1-minute story of how we sold our first deal?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay. So we were about 2 years in and building out this network. And I think we were getting some notoriety locally because it was just novel to have a bunch of 20-year-olds starting a software company at that time. It wasn't as cliche as it is now. But we were very lucky in that we had a meeting at the Cleveland Institute of Music with their Dean of Enrollment VP Enrollment and their Dean. And we originally were pitching that, hey, maybe you could use this platform we're building as a way to showcase all of your students, basically give them a digital portfolio when they graduate alongside their credential. In the meeting, they had basically looked at what we were demoing and said, have you thought of using this for admissions? And we said, well, tell us more, which was the first time I'd ever done true product discovery, just asking, why are you asking that? And apparently they were being mailed around 1,500, if I remember the number, DVDs within 2 to 3 days of their deadline, physical DVDs that had to be duplicated, passed out to faculty, reviewed on, scored by paper, and then scanned. And that's how they made their admissions decisions. So we said, well, what would it take to do that online? They talked through basically what we had built plus a form and their logo on top. And we turned that around in about 3 months. We came up with a price of $10 per student. And that was our first 5-figure ARR contract. 1,500 DVDs times $10 ain't bad for your first deal.
That's
so
awesome.
That was kind of that, magical combination of ignorance is bliss, asking a lot of good questions and keeping an open mind to find an opportunity. And that's how we found ourselves in the business of selling software to universities. We ended up, from there, we became the largest video audition, albeit niche, but largest video audition provider in higher ed. That was really the start of Decision Desk.
And with that, when you talked about going with universities and everything, was your main goal to go after as many universities as possible, or go after a few universities and kind of tackle everything that you can provide for those universities, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. We stuck to a very narrow swim lane. We solved a very, very specific tactical problem in this servicing of video review for the admissions process. And to be quite candid, I think we took for granted how rare that is to find a niche and win fast. We grew from, I want to say, in the very first year that we were doing this, we were doing maybe 50,000 in revenue. And we grew to about $1 million in revenue in I want to say 24 months selling that solution, because we found our way into around, I think, 70, 80 universities using it. The real trouble kind of for the company was when we had taken on capital against that niche, which isn't big enough to really warrant true venture. So we found ourselves forced with the question of, are we video screening, period, as in video screening for lots of different verticals, or are we going vertical into the university and offering more services around the admissions process? And that actually, that was a struggle that took a lot of years to play out. Which of those two we were. A lot of difference of opinions between the co-founders on that and the board and all of the above.
No, that's awesome. If you don't mind, can you talk a little bit about how you then transitioned from Decision Desk to Wisr, and if they were at all related, and did you use advice from Decision Desk going into Wisr?
Yeah, let me think how to start that. So the move to Wisr at the beginning was bittersweet. I was very excited for a clean slate. We were built on the same cap table and product and infrastructure that I had created when I was 20, and I was, I think, 29 when the sort of original conversations about moving on to something else were starting to percolate. The company was in a tricky spot. I had recovered it sort of through two pivots. One, there was an initial pivot when we had stretched ourselves thin across being, so just to tell you where that battle played out from my last story, we did try to tackle a lot of different verticals as a video provider. And we stretched ourselves really thin. I don't think we understood what it took to be like a B2B player in all of those different angles. And we were overspending. And so we ended up having to cut a big portion of the team. We raised emergency capital, doubled down in higher ed, which is when we started building other admissions functionality. And we ended up doubling revenue that year without increasing OpEx. We then proceeded to, unfortunately, make a very strong error, tactical error, where we took on some really, really big services heavy projects on a tech stack where we had never, and kudos to, my co-founder at that time, CTO, who had built everything and made it work. We never quite replaced and had a strong sort of tech presence. And we were putting our lead engineers in really tough positions, really smart people, because we were selling things way ahead of where we had certain capabilities. And so we had sort of these really big enterprise deals. One was 7 figures in contract size, and we weren't quite able to service them. So what happened was, out of that successfully, but the company was not high enough growth where it really warranted raising additional capital. But it also was at a point where if we sold it, it would sort of be a dollar for dollar back for the investors. And we had to make a tough decision. I had to make a tough decision, which is, if I personally feel the desire to leave, is it the best course to bring in a new CEO, or best course to push the company for a sale? And I left that decision up to the board. And there was sort of a consensus that there's still a good company here, a really good heartbeat of a company, and that it would make sense to recruit a new CEO. So during that time, I did a lot of soul searching, and one of my good friends and awesome teammate, Kate Bolzer, she was my VP business development, had pitched this idea that every student should have a personal circle of advisors. And I was really interested in doing something with more of a student success lens to it, having now witnessed more of the education market. And so she had left and formed the company Wisr. And And then, I was basically like a very dedicated advisor, and then decided that this is something I'd want to co-found, and then jumped in with both feet.
That's awesome. Was there a lot of market research into Wisr? I know Kate originally started it, but like, did you see her do a lot of market research?
We Wisr has had some things that we leapfrogged because of our mutual experiences. Hers in the having worked in universities. She has her MBA from Chicago Booth. I've been School of Hard Knocks running software companies for a while. The thing we did a leapfrog on was at Wisr, we booked 6 figures in revenue before writing a line of code. So we knew that in higher education, you need really great pilot partnerships because it takes time. And it takes time, and it's peer influenced, and people need to see results before they get comfortable. And so huge kudos to Case. So it's Case Western, U Chicago, and then 2 liberal arts institutions, Oberlin College and Denison, where I'd formed good relationships. And those 4 institutions basically jumped in and created an advisory board that combined their success and career services team members. And that basically was a product advisory council. And we built the software with their thoughts in mind and essentially their capital behind it. And then once we felt good about that, we raised a seed round to basically go from there.
That's awesome. So how have things been going at Wisr recently, and especially with like all that's going on in the coronavirus and the COVID-19? You want to speak on that a little bit?
Yeah. So it's been an insane couple of weeks for us. It's so funny getting a chance to talk about some of the admissions work we did at Decision Desk, and we maybe are kicking ourselves for not seeing this earlier. But one of the solutions we decided to launch at Wisr under actually the partnership with the University of Chicago is the ability for newly admitted students to be connected with a current student who's a trained ambassador that kind of can be a peer mentor, but also a way for very authentic way for the admitted student to understand their future at the institution. If you think about voice of the university as the sort of sales voice of why to come to Case, the idea is a current student is going to be a much more authentic way for you to get a sense of really what campus is like. And we thought that would be a great, not only yield mechanism for the school, but also really helpful so the student has sort of a peer mentor when they show up on campus. So we had successfully launched this solution about 6 months ahead of coronavirus. And as soon as all these major campuses had to shut down their on-campus events, they had no vehicle to directly engage those admitted students with ambassadors, including the staff and the admissions counselors. And so in the last 2 weeks, we've implemented 18 new universities. And without being, I can't disclose numbers because we're privately held, but we've doubled the company's annual recurring revenue in total in the past 2 weeks. So it's been crazy. And when this sort of big influx started, our team was 6 people, including me and the other 2 co-founders. And so we've been doing what is normally a 45-day implementation inside of 5 days. And we're actually in the process of hiring 6 new people, all starting remotely for the company. So I feel truly grateful that we are one of the few companies that there has been opportunity. We're also grateful that the solution we built is one that can help schools because, the alternative was basically canceling everything to their strategy. So we're basically helping them virtualize what that strategy looked like. And what's nice is thinking longer term. Now, one of our visions was when a student steps foot on campus, they have a circle of advisors. And we sort of have bookended this where we have a lot of career mentorship from sophomore year on. We have the admitted student portal. So now we're working with provosts and even some presidents to think about the solution starting the minute you're admitted through to when you're an alum and sort of evolving with you through that life cycle, which is a really big vision for our technology on a campus, one that requires interplay from lots of departments and is kind of the fruition of now the company's, is the company 4? Yeah, the company just turned 4. So it's sort of the culmination of many work. It almost feels like the fast forward button was hit though, these past few weeks.
No, that's crazy. And I bet very hectic, but it's definitely something that like I wish I had when I was like looking at other schools, because they all look on paper and everything, but having that firsthand perspective of a student is definitely extremely helpful. When you talked about the recent universities that have now been on board with Wisr, was that you guys reaching out to universities, or was that universities more coming to you guys?
Say that question one more time. I want to make sure I got that.
Yeah. Was it universities reaching out to you and asking for your services, or were you guys like being the initiators and like telling the universities, hey, we have this service that could really benefit you guys?
I would say that primarily up until 2 weeks ago, it's an exclusively outbound strategy where we are sharing case studies and sort of informing the market that these types of relationships should be available virtually and on demand and not just in person in like advising centers, essentially. We're fortunate that we have a highly referenceable client base in 5 of the top 10 from US News and World Report. And so now it's moved to actually more of a referral and thought leader strategy where we try to be good stewards of the programs for the school and share those stories. And we're starting to see that from that more inbound business is starting to happen.
No, that's awesome. So do you have like an ultimate goal with Wisr, or like a timeline of how long you think you might stay? But yeah.
Not really. I don't pre-prescribe that. You can do something you're passionate about, make a difference, and make money, right? There's like sort of all these different variables. And for me, the lever of being a good father and being good to my family is a variable that wasn't in the equation. Like when I had Decision Desk, my first son was born kind of late into that venture. And this venture, we're solving a really interesting problem. It's growing very quickly. And what I really love is that my 2 co-founders, we really balance each other out very well. I mean, we've been working stupid hours these past few weeks, but sans that, everyone understands when I go offline from 5 to 8 p.m. to do dinner and, bath and bedtime with my kids, and I'll come back on at night. We can create a culture that is, I think, very modern and representative of people needing to live their lives and not just grind. Not that the 40-hour work week is always practical as an entrepreneur, but I think as long as we're growing and seizing market opportunity, I'm really excited about what we're building here. So I'm not doing it with a end in mind. I just want to, at the end of the day, as I put my board member hat on, we're driving tons of shareholder value, and let's keep doing that. And from a personal standpoint, it's nerve-wracking, but honestly, this is the only life I know, is starting companies like this. So I love it.
No, that's awesome. Can you talk to us a little bit about your team and like the people you work with daily and how long they have been with you? And I know some of them were with you at Decision Desk, so how that's translated now to Wisr.
Yeah. The team is really interesting. So, Kate and I essentially have come up with a really good balance where she's front of house and I'm back of house. Kate's an extrovert. I'm a forced extrovert by having to be a CEO for a while at my last company. I don't know if that's my natural being, but she's really good at sales, an incredible relationship builder, really good at reading people. That makes her a very effective CEO. And so she's able to keep pushing forward with energy and optimism and seizing opportunity. And I care very much about building something to last and building something great. And so I focus a lot on product, customer success, marketing, those sorts of elements. And the missing piece, who we recruited very early on, he's an equal equity co-founder, is Chris Ciccarello, our CTO. So this is going to sound ridiculous, but Chris is actually technically related to me. He's second cousins of my wife. Big extended Italian family kind of thing. And so he and I actually really met through the startup scene. We didn't really like cross paths in family life very much. And I'll tell you, I mean, how often do you meet a student venture where they're like, this is this great thing, but all I need is someone to code it, right? Which I always say, like, go sell it and convince someone that it's worth their time to code it. But Chris is one of, I think, just the best engineers and product minds I've ever met. And the timing was crazy because he was coming out of another venture and was literally like a minute away from signing on to become a senior engineer at Trello. This was 4 years ago. And I basically asked him, like, are you up for one more? Are you up for doing one more of these things? And so he hopped on board. So that's kind of how the co-founders clicked together. And right now, as far as the rest of the team concerned, we actually have 2 VFA fellows on the team serving in a marketing and customer success capacity. And we have a sales rep. So that was the 6. And we're right now hiring. We just recruited a new VP of customer success, 2 more senior engineers, and 3 customer success associates. So the team's, I think, at 10 right now, and with open recs, we'll probably be at 12 or 13 in the next month.
Wow, that's awesome. So we have our first question from Mitch Webb. He asked, how is Wisr prepared for the increase in customers, both in terms of infrastructure and manpower?
A really good question. So infrastructure-wise, again, with Chris, just with lessons learned, he's a pretty seasoned veteran at scaling SaaS products. And so as I sort of had to jump in and basically play the role of implementer to field these new deals, he took entirely a DevOps mindset over the past month. And so he's leveled up a lot of our infrastructure, and in the process, recruiting and putting in place a full-time DevOps role that just focuses on performance. Luckily, the product was built well, so it's been holding steady, and no major bugs. Sort of functionality has been really good. One thing that I appreciate about Chris's methodology is, he's really against doing anything custom for any one customer, unless it's sort of a separate professional services type deal. But the app itself is quite simple, although it has a lot of features. It's designed well enough that there's not a ton of surface area to break. And then from a customer success standpoint, I would say that that's been the greatest human capital need. First executive that we recruited was a VP customer success. So that's the first exec we've ever recruited in the last 4 years. We're putting in place a customer success platform. It's called Tatango. And we're staffing up CSAs because we are keeping up with ticket volume, but it's, what's the word? It's unsustainable, but it's like, it's a false metric because, me and Anna, our CSA, are answering tickets like 12 hours, 14 hours a day. And so just to be scalable, we're getting that down, training people and putting a routine in place.
No, that's awesome. So we have another question here from Sarah Bartlett. You mentioned you sold 7 figures of business without having the product fully developed. How did you manage any differences between what you had sold and what the end product turned out to be? Was that something that you were transparent about with the initial customers?
That's a really good question. So short answer is, we did not manage the differences successfully. That deal did not go very well. But what I will say is we were very transparent in the implementation process that you're working with a startup, and while it was a 7-figure deal, it probably should have, this is going to sound nuts, it should have been an 8-figure deal in retrospect. It was Decision Desk or Oracle were actually the 2 main vendors in the deal. And the CIO at the time was leaning more towards making this a custom Oracle build because they're on PeopleSoft. And Wisr had a really big ally with the deputy CIO who really wanted to work with a smaller company and do something more sort of modern UI. And be more UI UX centric for the end user, which is essentially what we pitched. It's what we sold, is that we're going to be a more modern approach, but you'll have to bear with us in sort of the professional services side. And when we started to slip in our timeline, CIO threw down the hammer and pulled the plug on the project because there was dissonance there internally. So not saying that was their fault, right? It was us who ultimately didn't deliver, but there wasn't, while we were being transparent, it was not a good deal for us to be in the first place for that kind of relationship, which I can say that was a great lesson learned. The dev partnerships we've entered into with Wisr, Case being one of them, it has been so fruitful. Most of our features, most of our growth, most of our mutual wins sort of come from the information sharing and co-ownership of a lot of that product roadmap. So, there's right ways to do it, and there's, as I've learned, wrong ways to do it.
No, that's great. And just for the audience and everything, please continue to send in questions. They're great, and I know it's always helpful to hear from other people. To continue, John, I saw on your LinkedIn, it says you're a startup coach. Can you talk about what that's been like and how you're going about that?
So that is probably the one bullet point in my description that's gotten the least attention of any of them, between having 2 kids and this business kind of going bananas the past month. But I do actively mentor startups. I'm very passionate about helping student startup teams in particular, only because I've been in their shoes and I know there's a lot to learn, but also just raw energy that these student entrepreneurs have that is pretty magical and a really important thing to foster. I would say to wax philosophical for a second, the thing that I really like to do is just help startups who have gotten a little stuck in a bit of this VC pitch capital raise mindset before having truly figured out product market fit. And I will say the startup ecosystem generally and how things are, I've seen taught at Case and other entrepreneur programs have done a really nice job sort of upgrading their philosophies on this. When I went through some of the early entrepreneurship programs, all they really cared about were these pitch competitions. And I'll be honest, pitch competitions are great to drive event attendance and to give people a deadline to work against, but they really have nothing to do with building a business, right? And so I like meeting with student startup teams and helping them really think about what it's going to take to get customer number one. And if they have customer number one, to get customer number 10, and so on and so forth. And just think really practically about building the business and not necessarily, think bottom up, not just like this top down slide deck market view type aspect of the world.
And to go along with that, you must see like a lot of startup plans. So how do you determine whether the company will survive in like today's society?
What do you mean by that exactly? Do you mind clarifying? Sorry.
Yeah. Just like if you are looking at a lot of startup plans, like how do you determine if it is a good company or not?
That's a good question. Well, I think early on you're betting on the team, and you're also betting on their ability to achieve product market fit. I don't think, so I don't want to sort of masquerade as someone who's making sort of late stage venture investments, trying to decide what the true end all be all market potential of these companies could be. I more know that there are businesses of all sizes and shapes, and understanding kind of what size and shape you can get a win at is important. And sometimes as a young startup, you get carried away by all the potential and forget to get incremental daily wins and just do the best. You sort of have to do the next best thing, and then from there figure out the next best thing, rather than get too carried away with sort of shiny object syndrome, is what I call it, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. So we have another question from Sarah. When first creating a business, it is easy to get carried away with thinking about scaling from a financial perspective and not necessarily an operational perspective. Right now, you mentioned you're needing to rush to backfill needed capacity. What are some of your thoughts for when this current rush has slowed, and what your organization will look like then?
So that is also something learned from experience. So I can tell you, reflecting back at Decision Desk, when we won that really big deal, we staffed up to a point that was untenable. Without that deal. The company right now has successfully implemented 70% of those deals. Like, they're up, live, and thrilled. So we've actually executed on them successfully, and we have enough revenue per employee that we're, on a metrics basis, clearly understaffed. So the key is to hire so that we can continue to support this business and support sort of a growing amount of business without overhiring, assuming that this is the new normal. To be candid, though, it feels like we're not going to be out of these woods for a little while, and there's a magic to momentum. There's sort of a magic to momentum in that people have seen the great work we're doing, and more schools want to come to the table, because having these virtualized options, even without our current situation, is really a good thing to have, especially in terms of access. Not all students can afford to fly to campus for a tour. right? You need to have virtual options. So for us, we just are making sure that the staffing up is appropriate, but also the business is diversified in the sense that we're talking about a couple dozen universities who have come in and been implemented successfully rather than sort of one whale deal, which then you definitely have that risk where disproportionate percentage of your revenue sort of rides on one contract, which is, not the case here. Good question, though.
Yeah, that's great. We have another question from David Jargello, case 82. Assuming for the sake of the discussion that we are heading into a coronavirus recession, do you have any thoughts on the climate for venture investment? One, generally, and two, in the greater Cleveland area. My reference point for the question is in the sequel Capital Black Swan post on Medium in early March, which you may have seen.
Saw it, will be totally honest, skimmed, did not fully process. So without speaking kind of past my knowledge set, ironically, my first company was started in 2008, which also wasn't known for its good financial times. I think this is a different animal altogether, for sure. I mean, a lot of companies are going to suffer. A lot of companies that have capital that relied on having an 18-month runway to execute against, to grow against aggressive milestones, are going to be in a tough spot. I also think that born from constraints comes a lot of potential innovation, and there's a lot of other market needs that are going to emerge as a result of this. And entrepreneurs do what entrepreneurs do. So I will also be curious to see how the VC how VC funds respond to this. It seems like those who are adaptable still have to deploy that capital. They have that capital. It's a whole different ball of wax if they're making capital calls and they can't be realized if things truly get that bad. But it seems like it's going to be more management of current portfolio and understanding how their mechanism of investment is going to adapt. But again, I can't speak to it from a VC mindset, more from just seeing some of my friends' startups struggle and a few of my friends' startups thrive, sort of this polarizing dynamic. Be interesting to see how it shakes out.
Yeah, and you mentioned how Decision Desk in 2008 was dealing with that recession. How difficult was it to start your first company during that time period?
Honestly, ignorance is bliss. We didn't really know. Two things on that. The first is that we, as a college entrepreneur, didn't really care about paying myself, just cared about building something cool. So in that sense, we weren't aggressively hungry for raising capital. We didn't even actually raise our first round till 2010. So that didn't take as much of an impact. The other thing is we actually found ourselves in the education market, which actually, in some ways, ed tech did very well through that recession because there was a flood of people going back to graduate schools, and the birth of the online divisions of universities really expanded at that time. University of Phoenix obviously kind of polarized the opinion of online education, through the Apollo Group, because those sorts of online schools, terrible attrition, right, retention rates, all of that stuff. But as a second wave to that, universities have created really strong online arms that have great faculty, really good virtual education. And so in some ways, certain, public public sector stuff like education does really interesting things at times like this. And I'm just starting to be old enough in pattern recognition enough to sort of see a few of these waves. So no one could have predicted what's happening now. But what's interesting is for us as a company, we knew we were onto something. This literally hit the fast forward button where people are repeating back to us what we've been preaching for a while, which is you need these virtual options. It just kind of has become an urgent matter as opposed to something they're planning for and investing in a multi-year time frame.
Yeah. And talking about like today and everything that's going on, have you found it more difficult to kind of hire people in this current climate and like kind of start new employees virtually versus like what you would typically do?
That's a good question. Our company actually decided to go fully remote, or at least default remote, in December. So that was, again, lucky from a timing standpoint. We had an office. We just decided to default to remote and get together in person for brainstorming and team meetings and stuff like that. So for the core team of 6, like, we didn't miss a beat. But having to onboard some of our first hires on Monday, fully virtually, we had some interesting issues. We're hiring 5, not 50. So I think we have time to figure it out, but it's different. Let's put it that way.
And I know this virtual world's kind of new for a lot of people, but are you looking to only hire people like in the greater Cleveland area, or now that not everything's virtual, but it's leaning towards that direction, is it okay to like hire people from different areas and stuff like that?
2 of our most recent hires are one's in Chicago, one's in Denver. So we're going, we're hiring from anywhere. If they can be in Cleveland, I think we add an extra point, on the resume. But honestly, we're just looking for the best talent, and we're really proud to be headquartered in Cleveland. But there's no reason we shouldn't hire great talent from all over the country. And ultimately, I think that still strengthens. We're very proud to be based here. Like we want to be supportive to the city of Cleveland, but I think it even helps that we recruit amazing talent from larger cities who work for us remote, and the basis of income is coming into here. So, and also, candidly, it can be hard for certain skill sets, like engineering. Actually, that game cuts both ways. A lot of the best engineering talent here is working from their home for a San Francisco-based company, right? So, it's a whole new world, right?
No, that's so true. I know it is coming up to 2:00. I had a last few questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
First one was, what were some of the biggest challenges that you face being an entrepreneur?
Letting people down. I think like a lot of kids who probably go to Case, shouldn't call you kids. Didn't mean it that way. Like a lot of students who go to Case, I was always good at school, took on a lot of extracurriculars, did well on assignments. I like failure from a hypothetical standpoint, like building, testing products, things don't go well. But when you have to fire somebody who you really like and you know them and you know their family, like embracing somebody else's failing because you failed, that's a really hard lesson as an entrepreneur. I think most other things you get over yourself, right? I have very little ego about this kind of stuff, but I always take those things hard, which is why I think inappropriately staffing up or injecting companies with too much capital when things aren't proved out creates scenarios like that. So I'm sensitive to that.
No, that's great. And then what would you recommend to someone like myself who might want to potentially own their own business one day?
Have you sold something before?
Like not really, no.
Okay. Sales, going and selling something, it's not a sleazy skill. It's convincing someone that their hard-earned dollar is better spent by something you're going to provide for them than anything else they can buy. Rarely, you're usually competing against the alternative for that dollar, right? Not some competing feature set. And so just learning to go out and do customer discovery and win a customer is the ball game, and learning from that and then building a great product and service, and then from that building a great company are steps that follow. But a business has to start with a customer. And I'm not trying to oversimplify it. There are situations where you have advanced technologies, things that require patents, things that require immense amounts of capital. But I'll say that's 1 in 50, maybe, startups where I run into when I'm meeting with sort of a young or emerging entrepreneur.
No, that's all super helpful. Those were all my questions. I know that was all really insightful, and I can't thank you enough, John.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I can send it back to you if that's all right.
Of course. Thank you, John, Bob, for taking the time today to talk with us about entrepreneurship, COVID-19, and just how we're dealing with the world today. This will conclude today's conversation. You can join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. We'll be talking with Rebecca Braun, who is the founder and CEO of Braun Inc. And she'll be talking about her career journey, entrepreneurship, and how COVID-19 impacts her business and just the written word in general. And that will be facilitated by Ed Karakis, who's a case BS in chemical engineering student. So thank you so much for joining today, and have a great rest of your day.
Hey, Doug, are we still dialed in?
Yeah.
I should have made a proud plug for any Case alums on the phone to join case.wisr.io. And Bob, your entrepreneur question, there's probably there's thousands of alums on there who would be great for market research and product discovery. People in every industry, every community. So for Case students, it's kind of a really killer well to tap as well. I promised the alumni relations team I would plug Wisr, so I'm doing my duty.
Well, thank you for doing that, and I'll send that out to everyone that attended today as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, John.
Have a good day.
Thank you, Doug.